Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good to see you here this afternoon.
Likewise, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Speaker, just a few questions for clarification purposes to the good chair of the Public Health Committee.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Speaker, we already established Public Act 17-2. So having established that, you said this bill was just technical changes that were there. So in technical changes, I know sometimes a lot can be included in technical changes. So I just want to make sure in these technical changes, A, are we adding staff to what was already agreed upon in the past? And B, if so, who is going to be paying for that staff? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I understand the good representative's question, which I believe relates to the previous questions, the staff, which will be a modest staff to administer the new role, is covered by the expenditures in the insurance fund. And through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Srinivasan.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, and that was my understanding too. I just wanted to clarify that. And so since there is going to be the hiring of new staff, and as our good Representative Zibran brought about the cost factor, does the good chairman, can he give us an idea as to what will be the increased burden on the insurance companies? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I don't have a number handy. Obviously, the emphasis is on establishing an efficient group, but to be fair, there will be some expenses that even go beyond staff. The establishment and the maintenance of a database which will have this health data. There will certainly be some analysis that needs to take place. So there are some investments by the state of Connecticut via the insurance fund to assure that we can get the kind of results, the kind of product from the Office of Health Strategy that's going to lead to the benefits for the people of the state of Connecticut. Through you.
Representative Srinivasan.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, the goals are commendable. No question about that at all, to collect the data. But my concern is it an open check where we really don't know what the cost is going to be on the insurance fund? Through, because ultimately that's going to come down to you and me. It's going to come down to the taxpayer of Connecticut directly or indirectly. So it seems to be we are saying that we're going to go ahead with a plan, which is a good plan, no question about that. But the plan also needs to be tied in as to what the cost factor is. And it seems to me, through you, Mr. Speaker, we do not have an idea. Yes, we are saying it'll be on the insurance fund, no question about that. But do they know what the tab will look like, or in the ballpark at least? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the good representative's concern to make sure that, as we do with every aspect of government, that we spend our money wisely. And as I've said previously, there are going to be a lot of eyes on this. And I really look forward to the ongoing collaboration between our committee and the Office of Health Strategy. This is going to be one of the more exciting things that we do. So I can assure you there's going to be a lot of communication, a lot of review of how they're operating and how they're bringing about change in the state of Connecticut. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to go forward in a way in which everybody should have a good comfort level. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Srinivasan.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, yes, there'll be a lot of eyes watching and making sure every dollar, every penny is spent wisely. But through you, Mr. Speaker, who has the final authority? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That would be the Executive Director of the Office of Health Strategy. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Srinivasan.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, does that executive officer work with or in collaboration with the board? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the representative repeat the question? I missed the very end of that. Through you.
Representative Srinivasan, do you care to repeat your question?
Definitely, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Speaker, this executive director is the final say in what the proposals are going to be, and I'm concerned about the cost factor, since it is an open check. Good as it is, well-intended as it is, it's still an open check. But through you, Mr. Speaker, is the only final authority the executive director, or is there a board that also is going to be established, or is there one that is going to have a way in as well? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There will be others who will have a lot of involvement with the operations of the Office of Health Strategy. But to be explicit, I do not believe they necessarily have any final authority with regard to the operations, as the good representative described. So that really still resides with the executive director. Through you.
Representative Srinivasan.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, switching into another set of questions regarding the protection of identity and privacy, which is also raised by our good ranking member, Representative Betts. Through you, Mr. Speaker, the agencies that will report to the Office of Health Strategy, how will that data be decoded so therefore identity is not a concern? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
I'm sorry, once again, through you, Mr. Speaker, I didn't pick up the question part. Through you.
Representative Srinivasan.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, the question is, what is the process that we have? The identity, the privacy will not be revealed in this transfer of information to the OHA. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, the representative, for the clarification of the question. My understanding is that the state of Connecticut will benefit from the best practices in data protection, working with a firm that has accomplished this for other states. It's certainly something that has been one of the most sensitive issues since the discussion of electronic health records were first brought forward. There are any number of security protections, but to answer the representative's question directly, it's really a matter about how the data is stored and that it's only revealed in aggregated form, not disaggregated to the point of individual identity by name or anything else that would allow you to identify a specific person. There's been a lot of best practice built into this over the years, and we believe we have a good partner such that we're doing everything possible to assure that identity is not revealed. Through you.
Representative Srinivasan.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, as we speak here on a Tuesday afternoon, on a Wednesday afternoon, through you, Mr. Speaker, do we know who their partner is, or that is going to be the privy of OHS to come up with a partner, assuming that this bill moves forward? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My understanding is that we do have a partner who's working in several other states currently. The name escapes me, but they have been thoroughly vetted and have had a very successful record in not only providing a great database, but in providing the protections that we're also concerned about. And I should add that, to correct my previous statement, all aspects of the data management part are not paid for by the insurance fund, but are actually paid for by federal funds. So that component of it is really not an issue for the insurance fund funding. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Srinivasan.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, it's now my turn not to clearly understand what the good chair said. So if you could go to us this difference between the insurance fund, the federal fund, and who is responsible for what, because obviously that's excellent for us to know that we are going to be getting federal funding, and I want to make sure we are all clear on what is it that's coming from the insurance fund and what is it that's coming from the federal funds. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, allow me to offer that clarification. The insurance fund will cover the cost of staff and general operations of the Office of Health Strategy in all its various responsibilities, but explicitly that relates to the data management piece, which is significant, is underwritten by federal funds as it is in virtually every state. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Srinivasan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So in this data collection, which is desegregated, will ethnicity, will race be a factor that will be included in this or will not be included in this data collection? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has indeed been an issue of some controversy, the issue of race and the labels that are used to identify people. I have been assured by the Office of Health Strategy that the information on race, will not be disaggregated in the fashion that has raised a lot of those concerns. So certainly, race is not the basis for making healthcare decisions and is not the key component of our data collection. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Srinivasan.
So through you, Mr. Speaker, could the good chair then elaborate how this data will be collected, excluding race, excluding the ethnicity? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There will be some information that will be ethnicity related, but it will be at a very top-level basis. It will not be disaggregated by geography or some other factors that would raise concern. It will be consistent with how health data has been collected in the past and will not represent any new frontier in further breaking down ethnic information. So this does not represent any departure from what has been collected in the past successfully over a period of decades in terms of health information, and has been respected in that process. Through you.
Representative Srinivasan.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the good representative is aware of the concerns that were raised with information that is being collected on an ethnic basis, on a racial basis, and am I to understand that none of those would be included in this data collection from through the office of OHS? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I understand the representative's question, based upon all the emails that I received, I'm sure the good representative received and others may have received, the type of disaggregation by subgroups of any ethnicity will not be collected in the fashion as to which people have feared. We are working in close collaboration with the Office of Health Strategy to assure we have every confidence that the data they're collecting has integrity and has specific use for improving health outcomes. And there should be no reason to collect the data at the level which has caused so much concern among members of the community. Through you.
Representative Srinivasan.
And through you, Mr. Speaker, the final question is, could the good chair tell us as to whether such a system exists in other states? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Steinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't speak chapter and verse for how every state handles this. I know that other states have chosen to collect different data points than we do, but we are really going to be working directly with the Office of Health Strategy to make sure we do what's best for the people of Connecticut. We're not relying on what other states do in order to decide what we want to do. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Srinivasan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill is well intended, no question about that at all. You know, we do need data. We need adequate data to make important decisions on the public health. There's no question about that at all. I'm not here arguing against that. But my two concerns about this bill, A, is the data collection process. The integrity of this process is, I'm still concerned about that, because we heard extensively the various racial concerns that people have, the ethnicity that may be a concern here, and I'm not convinced as we stand here today, Mr. Speaker, that that privacy will be retained as we hope and we know it should. And my other concern is the cost factor. I mean, I would like to know what it is that we are signing off today. Yes, there is a federal component. I'm glad to hear that. But also, what is the impact as far as the state is concerned? For us to stand here and say the taxpayer is not paying, it is by the Connecticut Insurance Company, ultimately, in my opinion, is no different than you and me through our insurances. So for those reasons, till we have a little more information that I'm comfortable with, I will not be able to support it this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Srinivasan.